Start off a little bit about myself and my writing before I get into the read aloud. This is a first for me that I actually have notes. I never make notes, and these notes are compliments of Carrie Evelyn. Thank you so much. So I am Angelique Bochnak, aka I write under the name of A.M. Bochnak. And I am coming live from Gainesville, Florida. So hello, wherever you are, and thank you for joining. So my first career is as a scientist, environmental scientist specifically, and I've been working as a scientist for 20 plus years of my life, and I started writing about 5 years ago. And so writing and teaching workshops is my second career, and I hope to one day be able to make a full-time living from my writing itself. I see Jessica and Raquel and Megan have joined, so yay, at least that lets me know that this is actually live. Let me know if there's any issues with the video feed, because like I said, what I'm watching is very, very jumpy. So I hope it's okay on your end. So I teach workshops through the Writer's Atelier. I've taught one so far. I think it was in late 2019, and I have some more planned this year, and hopefully I'll be able to work with Raquel to get some online workshops while we're going through all this social distancing, stay-at-home stuff. But hopefully that'll end soon, because I'm really looking forward to getting some workshops into the new studio. So my passions are writing, watercolor painting, and pottery. I love art, all things creative. I'm a huge supporter of the arts, and I wish we had more of that in our education, because art and really tapping into our artistic side, it just does so much for the soul, and it really helps, calm us down when we live in such a stressful environment and a stressful world. So it's a huge passion of mine, and I really support. So in addition to writing, I also, have some an artistic side of myself, where I also sell some of my work and some of my pottery and some of my paints and things like that too. I do book cover designs as well. There'll be some more information about that coming out soon. And I also am working on more of the digital arts as well. I'm finding it's totally different than working with art on paper. And so hopefully one day in the future, I'll also be able to offer custom digital art for book covers as well. So fun fact about myself, I absolutely love dragons. As you can see, I have a nice collection of dragons here. I don't consider myself a dragon expert by any means, but I love them, and maybe one day I will be a dragon expert, especially the more that I write about dragons. Some of my future work will include dragons, and I'm looking forward to writing a lot more about dragons. I see a few more names popping up here of people that I know. Thank you so much for joining in, Carrie and Casey and Colleen and Lisa. Let's see, so I may live in Gainesville, Florida now, but I was born and raised in southern Ohio, the tri-state area of Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia, the northern plains of the Appalachian Valley to be exact. A few years ago, the part of the state of Ohio that I was born in was ranked as the third most white trash city area in the nation. Now, keep in mind, that was a very non-scientific internet study data that was done. But anyway, nonetheless, it was interesting. I found it funny, and being from that part of the state of Ohio, I found it somewhat accurate. While I may live in the South, and very occasionally my Kentucky, West Virginia twang may come out in some of the words that I say, I am 100% Yankee. I may live in the South for the rest of my life. You will never take the Yankee blood out of me. I am married to an amazing man named Richard. He supports every wild and crazy idea that I have, and he supports my writing career 100%, which is awesome. And I have 3 kids that make me feel really, really old, especially my oldest, which is getting ready to turn 23 this summer. And then my son is 10, and my youngest daughter is 8. So that is a little bit about me, Angelique. And so now I'd like to tell you a little bit about me, A.M. Bochnak, the writer. Let's see. I mostly write adult science fiction and fantasy. It can be rather dark, but I always try to incorporate a hopeful theme. You might not always see it right away, and it might not always be obvious, but it is there. Sometimes you just gotta be patient and wait for it. But I do like the darker side of science fiction and fantasy, and the darker, deeper side of writing. I write mostly books in series. My first book series that is out will be a 4-book series. And as such, with it being, which is common in science fiction and fantasy, my books all have cliffhangers. They all end that lead into the next book. And so I know some people don't like cliffhangers. I personally love them. I love the anticipation of what it creates in writing books. But again, that is also somewhat common in science fiction and fantasy, especially in a series, to have those. So if you hate cliffhangers, my books might not be for you. But if you don't mind them and you find them exciting as well, then please, by all means, read along. But a common theme in all my writing is strong female characters, and very, very flawed female characters. Part of the journey of the female characters and the heroines that I write is to kind of find their self and find their strength through that journey, and to overcome whatever weakness or flaw that they have, and realize and learn and accept that they can do what I need them to do in order for the story to progress. So my first book series that I have started publishing is called the Magical Bond series. I will be reading from the first book in that today. This is Fortitude Rising. Yay, my first book, published in 2018. The second book in the series, Aftermath of Defiance, is also out and available. It was published in the late summer of 2019. The third book in the series, Aftermath of Defiance, will be coming out, oh my gosh, in a week? Next week? April 21st. So close. So close. So not ready for a book launch. But anyway, so that book series, the first book series, the Magical Bond series, will actually be 4 books. So I mentioned the third book comes out this month. The last book in the series, which will be titled Beyond the Bond, will not come out until 2021. I don't have a date or anything on that yet, but it is in the works. And then that will complete that first book series. But I have a lot of writing that I work on. I'm one of those individuals, I work on multiple projects at a time. And while it's my priority to get this book series finished and done, I have several other book series planned. One of them, as I mentioned, I love dragons, is an epic fantasy. And I've written several short stories to lead into this epic fantasy, that world that I've created. And the series is going to be called The Gods of Dragons. I know, because I love dragons. And I will have a few short stories that lead into that universe coming out later this summer. The first one is one that's called The Dragon's Pearl. That one is actually ready to publish. It's still going to go through formatting and all of that before I can actually make it available. But I'm hoping that will be sometime this summer. And then there's a couple other short stories that I've written to build into that universe coming out this summer as well. I'm writing a short story for one of Laura Perez's anthologies, Cabin Fever, which is coming out later this year. And that short story I know is due soon, but I'm working on that. And that is actually going to end up having a fantasy theme to it that I'm going to incorporate and build into the Gods of Dragons universe that I've created. So I'm really excited about that addition to this collection of short stories. Another planned new series, I say it's planned, but I've actually written one of the books and written half of the second book in this new series that will come out. And it is actually a gas lamp fantasy romance. If you don't know what gas lamp fantasies are, they kind of spun off of steampunk, and most people are familiar with steampunk. And really the difference is steampunk, a lot of it is kind of based off kind of historical fiction set in a past time. Steampunk, they really rely more on gadgets and items and technology to provide kind of like the magical, fantastical element. And while the humans themselves don't possess any magic, they use items and technology and gadgets to kind of provide that fantastical element. Whereas in gas lamp fantasy, they're typically set in the Victorian or Edwardian time period, and it is where you're dealing with more paranormal beings, creatures, and witches, or the people themselves and the creatures themselves provide that magic rather than relying on gadgets. And so it's a new, so I'm really excited about that series. It's new writing for me. And like I said, the first book of that series is titled The Whispering Hour. It is written and it is in revision. It is in the revision phase, and I'm hoping that that one will be available later 2020, but it might not be until 2021. We'll see. I have a lot of projects in the work if you haven't noticed. In addition to writing fiction, I also am a journal fanatic. I have a journal collection. I have journals of all kinds. I meant to drag one out so I'd have it as an example that I collect and that I'll never write in because they're just too pretty. But I also have a series of creative journals available as well. One's called I'm Actually a Unicorn. It is a sci-fi fantasy writing prompt journal filled with writing prompts. I think there's 100 writing prompts that are all geared towards science fiction and fantasy writing. Another one is called Fairy Sightings. It's a journal of creative arts and coloring with notes to take notes, put your creative mind to work and go out in nature and go fairy hunting and write notes about it. And the other one is called Let There Be Dragons. It's mostly a journal with some prompts about dragons as well. In addition to that, I have a nonfiction book that I'm working on with writers Atelier. It's a workbook called Plotting with Purpose that I'm continually working on, and I'm hoping that I will get that work through that and get that done later this year as well. And so I will start the reading here soon, in just a moment. Just so you know, I posted a couple of posts in the discussion for the this event. One of them includes a link to where you can sign up for my newsletter. So if you like what you hear today and you don't already subscribe to my newsletter, visit that link in the event on the event page, and you can sign up for my newsletter where I'll send out announcements about new releases, upcoming projects, sometimes freebies, free short stories and things like that. So if you want to stay in touch and kind of get stay up to date on when I have new stuff coming out, my newsletter is the place to be. And so with that, I will go ahead and start reading. As I start reading, if you have any questions, go ahead and start dropping those questions in the comments at any time, because like I said, there is a delay. Moving the screen on me. There is a delay, so the sooner you get those questions in there, the sooner that I will see them and they will pop up. So I am going to start by reading. I'm going to read the first 2 chapters from my debut novel, Fortitude Rising. I'm very proud of this book. This is the 3rd novel I ever wrote, first novel that I published. It is an award-winning book. I was very proud of that achievement, and I'm excited to share it with you guys today. So I'm going to start at the beginning of chapter 1. All right. Okay, chapter 1, Spring 2031, Day 1, late Tuesday. Freedom is a dangerous right to fight for, and if won, there's no guarantee it will bring happiness. Ebony Hunter fought her father for her freedom nonetheless. She tilted her head towards the stars above and took in a deep breath of fresh air. A light breeze blew her long black hair behind her, sending a shiver down her spine. If she had changed before teleporting to the lighthouse, she wouldn't have been so cold. She looked down at her shirt, still damp with blood from her training session with her father. Another request for freedom, gone bad. She came to the lighthouse when she needed to escape her father and his unreasonable demands on her magic. It was her quiet place, tucked away on the opposite end of the island. Outside her own visits, there were no signs that another soul had been here in years, its purpose and use long forgotten. The lighthouse was hers, and hers alone. The constant surveillance in the main compound kept her nerves on edge, and she couldn't relax. Not like she could when she was here. She felt the eyes watching her every minute of every day. Her father knew her every move, or so he thought. She worried he would discover her visits to the lighthouse. No matter how careful she was, he always seemed to be one step ahead of her. The lighthouse was worth the risk, though. She needed it to escape her prison and feel free, even for a brief moment. Ebony found the last remaining dry spot on the front of her shirt and held it over her nose. Her defiance towards her father was not helping. She already struggled with her magic, and this put too much strain on her. She leaned over the railing to gaze at the city off in the distance. A faint mist, fed by the cold evening air, was creeping across the river, blanketing the reflection of the city lights. She loved the city skyline, and how the soft warm glow of bright skyscrapers and flashing billboards dampened the darkness. She longed to walk among the skyscrapers and breathe in the glory of the city. She fantasized about how wonderfully freeing it would be in the city streets, with no one constantly watching her every move and pushing her magic beyond its limits. Her father would never let her leave the island. He never let her leave the main compound of the institution. If he knew she came here, he would tear down the lighthouse. It was for her safety, he said, when she asked. That was a lie. It was so he could control her, manage her the way he saw fit. He treated her like the broken 11-year-old girl who just lost her mother. He never saw her for the grown woman she had become. Her chest tightened, fighting back the tears, threatening to fill her eyes. Her memories of her mother had faded over the years, and she struggled to recall her face. She remembered her smile. Her mother always smiled. It was the bright, radiating smile that drew people in. Some say Ebony inherited her mother's smile, but she didn't inherit the same comfortable ease her mother had with others. She lacked the comforting hugs and tender words that drew people to her mother. With more vivid memories of her mother rushing back, Ebony shook her head to clear her thoughts and stop the tears she knew would come if she didn't end it now. It was her mother who named her special magical ability. Her mother described her magic to her as an advanced form of telekinesis. She called it evanescence. Anybody of the magical bond could move objects around with their mind. Ebony can make objects disappear and reappear somewhere else. No one else could do that. Ebony's true gift, however, was her ability to teleport herself, a skill even the strongest magical bond didn't possess. Unfortunately, her magical well was shallow, and using her advanced skills weakened her body. She looked up at the sky and frowned at its darkness. The only lights shining near this side of the island were the stars and skyline in the distance. The fog subsided as the night air cooled the river's surface. Without the fog, she could see the full reflection of the city lights illuminating the river. She wished she could see more stars, but they were hidden behind a glowing blanket created by the city lights. They masked her view of the stars even from this tiny island seated in the middle of the river. Ebony dreamed of running away to some place without light pollution, where she could see stars like the pictures in books. A dream she wished on almost as much as her dream of standing amongst those city lights. She scanned the East River, knowing she should head back soon. That's when she saw a boat heading in her direction. The darkness made it difficult to see with certainty, but it looked like it was heading straight for the island. She never saw a boat this close to the island at night before, not once in all the years she'd been sneaking out to the lighthouse, nor from the vast windows from her quarters. She often saw boats traverse the river off in the distance, but they never came anywhere near the island. The only boats that ever docked were the weekly supply boats, but they came in the mornings. She watched it closely. not daring to take her eyes off it once. She was afraid to even blink, afraid that if she did blink, it would disappear as if it never existed. She wanted the boat to be real, not an illusion. It soon became clear the boat was heading for the western dock, almost dead center of the island. The island was small and oblong. From her vantage point in the abandoned lighthouse, she could see the main compound on the opposite end where her father and friends were sleeping. More buildings belonging to the institution were cluttered in the island's middle and spanned the distance to the main compound. There weren't any buildings next to the lighthouse, but it was only a short walk to the center. She didn't know the last time the beacon was lit. She assumed long before her lifetime. If someone looked in her direction, it was unlikely they would see her standing at the top. The only source of light around her came from the soft glow of the city and the moon hovering overhead. The moonlight alone wasn't enough to push back the shadows. A spotlight flashed over the approaching boat, and she could see the writing on the side. It read SUM Transport vessel. Ebony's breath caught in her throat. That boat belonged to the institution. SUM had to stand for Scientific Understanding of Magic, the name of this institute. It didn't look like the supply boats. This boat was different. She leaned over the railing, focused on the boat until it reached the dock. So much so, she hadn't noticed the men waiting for it to arrive until one of them yelled, "You're late. Where have you been?" "You can go collecting next time if you think you can do it faster," a gruff voice answered from the boat. "You think this is a walk in the park?" Ebony stepped back into the shadows, leaning into the wall, making sure she was out of view and hidden. She held her breath and waited until she was certain they had not seen her standing there. She watched from the shadows. It took several minutes for the men to tie up and start unloading its cargo. People? Why are people coming off the boat, and why so many? Ebony targeted her energy on them, attempting to teleport her mind without taking her body, another one of her powerful skills. She used it to scan areas for others before teleporting or to spy on her father, and it benefited her many times. This time, however, her power failed her. Her knees buckled and her head started to pound. She was too weak. Her body hadn't recovered from her earlier training session. Being outside also made it tougher for her. There was so much open space. She needed the confines of walls to focus her power. She sensed their presence, their unhappiness and fear. Nothing more. It took a long time for them to unload. They were linked together, a rope or chain tied between each one. A long, narrow ramp connected the dock and the boat. They sullenly shuffled, unable to take large steps because their feet were shackled together. The ramp wobbled every time as they the ramp wobbled several times as they unloaded. Ebony held her breath, waiting for them to fall into the river, but it never happened. They looked like prisoners. Why would prisoners be brought to the institution? This was a place of learning and research. They were led to the smaller buildings in the middle of the island. Ebony had no idea what was in that building, or any of the other buildings for that matter. There were at least 10 buildings beside the main compound. It never occurred to her to try going into any of them. She watched until the last person was inside. 30 in all. Her anger towards her father grew stronger. He had to know about these people and why they were here. He was the director of the institution. Seeing these people in chains made her doubt her father more. She already didn't trust him, and now this? There was no reason for people to be brought here in chains. Ebony slowly slid down the wall to a seated position, trying to make sense of what she witnessed. She longed to talk to somebody about her powers, her pain, her father's agenda. If only there was someone she could tell about the boat and the people she saw. She reached out with her powers to feel for another living being. Nothing. Pushing her powers further and radiating farther from the lighthouse, she still couldn't find a soul. Out here in the open, her powers failed her. She felt utterly alone. Chapter 2. 1 week earlier. Connor Vance stretched his hands above his head and gripped his wrist, pulling on his arm. The knot in his neck didn't budge. He paced to the back of the room, taking in slow, steady breaths, slapping his face with each step. He regretted his decision to stay up all night. It probably wouldn't have mattered anyway, as sleep eluded him with the arrival of the map. The council meeting started soon, and it would be a tough one. He needed to be alert and prepared to stand a chance at convincing them this mission was critical. It didn't matter if he was their leader. The council's support and their majority vote was required by rule to get the order's full cooperation. It would take everybody to bring down the Federation. His informant finally gave him the map with the locations of the enhanced. This information would help him win the vote that would ignite the rebellion. The nation needed peace, and it would take a rebellion to bring that peace. Until now, all he had were rumors and hearsay from people who claimed to be collectors for some, or who were defectors ready to join the rebellion. He had no way of verifying their information, no way of knowing if what they said were true. He demanded physical evidence of the layout of the Institute and the activities that defined its existence from his informant. A courier delivered that evidence yesterday. Connor stood over the map of Research Island. It covered the entire surface of the large conference table in the meeting room. He'd stayed up all night studying this map and other documents that arrived with it. He memorized every building, its size, number of entrances, and location. The purpose of some of the buildings were unknown. Only a few were labeled. The documents also described some of the trials that were being conducted on the island, but it did not tell where they occurred. "Hey, man." Ness Kent walked through the door, stopping next to Connor. "How's it going?" "I'm tired." Connor dropped back in his chair, clenching his hands together as he stretched his arms above his head. "I was up all night, and I still don't feel prepared." "You're ready. Don't sweat it." "I wish all these buildings were labeled. I have no way of matching up these descriptions." "Hey, at least we know which one's the main compound." Ness leaned over his shoulder and pointed to the long building on the south end of the island. "We know enough. We'll be fine." "I'd be more confident if we had actual design drawings for these buildings. We need this vote, and we'll get it." Ness patted him on the back. "Let's hope." He let out a deep breath. "Here, man, you need coffee." Ness set a mug in front of him. "And food. When's the last time you ate?" "Last night's dinner." "That wasn't eating. I saw how little you ate. Good thing I brought breakfast too." He pulled out a bagel out of his bag and tossed it to Connor. "Eat before the others arrive." "Thanks." Connor scooted his chair closer to the table and took a big bite. He sighed as he swallowed. "This is good. I feel better already." Ness smiled, flashing his teeth at him. Connor was grateful for Ness, his oldest friend, his only friend, to be truthful. He always knew what to say and do to give him the confidence he needed to plow through. They met 11 years ago when they were both 16. They joined the order within days of each other and first became friends out of convenience. Neither knew anyone, so they latched together. As time passed, their friendship grew into a brotherhood, a bond as strong as any. He could always count on Ness. "Come on, man," Ness said calmly, almost a whisper. "We have an hour before the council meeting. Let's go get some fresh air. You won't learn anything new from the map in an hour." Connor started to object, but his restless legs could use a good stretch. A walk and fresh air would do him good. He stood, giving in to his friend. "I suppose you have a point." Next scene. Connor stopped in the doorway of the conference room. "Damn it, they're early." The other 5 members of the council were seated around the table examining the map. Why did he let Ness convince him to go all the way to the park? He wanted to go over the map and the mission one more time before the council arrived. Today was his only shot at this. Everything hung on their yes vote. He had to convince them. He looked around the room. Every pair of eyes turned to him, their faces covered with doubt and concern, especially Mark Rollins. Mark represented 1/2 of the Common Blood membership. He and L. Glover were the loudest voice for change and his greatest challenge. The other 5 council members were Magical Bond: Katrina Hicks, Nola Atkins, Silka Massey, Ness Kent, and himself. Mark glared down his nose at Connor and leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. Connor ignored him and took his position at the head of the table, the map's edge unfurled over the edge of the table. Ugh. The main compound stared up at him as he settled into his stance and prepared to speak. If anyone would sabotage the meeting, it was Mark. Hello, everyone. Connor paused, making eye contact with each member. What an unlikely group of allies. Abuse and oppression brought them together. Hope kept them partners. We all know why we're here. Let's get started. Yesterday afternoon, we received this map of Research Island and the documents detailing some of their trials. With this, we can execute the mission. All boats arrive at this dock. Connor leaned forward and rested his finger on the map. Whoa, whoa, Mark interrupted, his arm cutting the air. Back it up, Connor. We need to agree to this mission first. Connor stiffened. Here we go. Mark was ready to fight. Remind us what it is you propose to do. Connor nodded and smiled at Mark. He didn't want to fight. Fighting would only divide them. He couldn't risk losing any of their support, not even Mark's. We know that some has been gathering test subjects. They've been conducting weekly collections for a few years now, mostly from the homeless shelters. We know they're looking for strong, healthy test subjects. They also need powerful magical bond, and that's what they're struggling to find. That's why myself, Ness, Kat, and Nola are the ones going. The collectors won't be able to resist taking us. How can you be so sure that they'll take all 4 of you? Mark asked. Have you seen the homeless lately? Connor said. Most of them are barely hanging on to life, and they're common blood. We'll stand out. Mark shook his head no, resting his elbow on the table. You can't guarantee they'll take you, or that they won't take you out back and shoot you because they know you belong to the order. It's too risky. Connor leaned forward, shortening the distance between Mark and him. We accept that risk. The council hasn't accepted anything. The order needs you all alive. Our lives are worth the risk. If we succeed, we ignite the rebellion and we end this. Connor's voice cracked in a high pitch. He held his eyes steady on Mark as he spoke. No. Mark stood, slamming his fist on the table. You're no good to us dead. No one will die. Connor matched Mark's actions. I'll make sure of that. There's no way you can guarantee that, Mark yelled, throwing his hand in the air and slamming back his chair. Enough. Yelling like this will get us nowhere. Sit down and shut up. There was so much anger and hatred in Mark's actions. Hatred was the disease that infected everyone around them, spreading fast and feeding the war. He couldn't let him feed that further. He turned his back towards the group. Calm down, man. He had to get at least 5 votes, and pissing Mark off would not ensure that result. He could not afford to lose his temper. How will you get to the island? Connor relaxed slightly at the sound of Silka's voice. Her voice was always calm and soothing, no matter the situation. Connor faced Silka. She was smiling and nodding for him to continue. By boat. It's scheduled to leave next Tuesday, and we'll be on it. Connor glanced around the room, waiting. No one spoke. Mark sat glaring from his chair. Living quarters are in the main compound right here. Connor pointed and met Mark's stare. All testing is conducted here too. This is where we'll find the enhanced. There are 4 of them. Once we identify them and confirm their powers, we need to learn their motives. Killing them may be our best option. We can't kill 4 strangers. Mark let out a grumbling sound through his teeth. We know nothing about them. Connor closed his eyes and dropped his head into his hands. We know plenty. Their magical abilities are enhanced somehow. They're much stronger than any of us. Some has been experimenting on them for years, some since birth. Then let's capture them, make them work for us. We've no reason to believe they'd even consider becoming an ally, Connor said. It's too much power. Some plans to use their power to destroy us all. That's why we discussed killing them. It's a sacrifice that needs to be made. I'm not convinced killing them is the right option, Mark snapped, leaning forward in Connor's direction. But that isn't the issue. We can't afford to sacrifice you guys. I can't support this mission, and no one else should either. I get it, I really do, Connor whispered. He hung his head low. There was a truth behind Mark's words. If they failed, the Order would have no one. We need to level the playing field. Killing them does just that. We'll never win by stealing what they've created. That'll only cause them to take more drastic measures. Killing them is cruel and harsh. There has to be another way. Then what do you propose? Objecting without providing alternative solutions isn't helping the rebellion. We have to end this. Imagine what would happen to the common blood if magical bonds are enhanced with potentially endless power. They would be eradicated. It's only a matter of time until they target the deluded. They'll kill everyone except the pure. All you have is theories, Mark pointed in Connor's direction. None of us know what will happen. We don't have enough information to go through with this mission of yours. We have to come up with a different plan. This is the only plan. Connor pinched his lips tight. He yelled louder than he intended to. The time to strike is now. I understand everyone's hesitation, but we cannot lose this advantage. I don't want to kill anyone, but if killing a few results in a better future for the many, then I'll kill the few with or without your help. He couldn't handle too much more of this. He knew what this meant, and he would have to live with this decision for the rest of his life. So what you're saying, Mark yelled, is you're going to do whatever you want despite the council's decision. I'll do what has to be done. Then why are we even here? Because I need your help. Connor gripped his armrest on his chair and gritted his teeth. This will not be an easy mission. We need to know what the Enhanced can do, and if necessary, take them out. I cannot go alone. Then enough talk. Mark's face was red. Connor kept his eyes down, but he could feel Mark's eyes burning through his skull. Let's vote and see where everyone stands. Majority rules. Fine, we vote. Connor stood tall with his arms crossed over his chest. This decides it. No more questioning, no more discussion. All those in favor of moving forward with the mission as discussed, raise your hand. Connor, Ness, Katrina, and Elle raised their hands. The others shook their head no. Connor dropped his head. He needed 5 votes. Nola, Connor quivered, his jaw dropped. You've been with us all along. Why now? There's got to be a better way. Her head was down, and she was fiddling with the hem of her shirt. We cannot risk losing you guys. Mark's right. Well, that settles it. Mark had a huge grin on his face. No mission. We'll see about that. Connor stood, gathered his things, and rushed out the door. That is chapters 1 and chapters 2. All right. So I'm hoping that you guys are commenting, and I'm fearing I might be having the same issue that Laura had unless nobody's talking through this, because I haven't seen a single comment pop up here. So there are actually comments, because I'm pulling up my phone too, so I can actually see what you guys might have said or asked. Mark had a huge grin on his face. No mission. So I've got to pause. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. So I don't know what all the questions are, but I do see a question from Carrie asking, is Ebony in New York City? And that is a yes. That's actually one of the pre-questions I got too. I asked a few people to give me some questions in case I struggled with seeing questions online. And yes, this entire book story takes place in the New York City region. The first book, the inspiration for the location of the first book, the island, is actually an island called Three Brothers Island. And on that island, back long time ago, I think it was called Riverside Hospital. It was a contagious disease research hospital. And it was actually the final resting place of Typhoid Mary. So when I was researching locations and trying to pick where to the location for this story, and I knew I wanted an island, and I knew I wanted something kind of cool and mysterious. And when I was researching, islands that came up, it's not too far from Rikers Island, which most people know where Rikers Island is, in the East River in New York City. So yeah, so that is the location of Research Island for in Fortitude Rising, but the entire series does take place in New York City, unfortunately in varying degrees of, I'm just going to say, condition, because there's a lot of fun stuff, well, not so fun stuff happens as a result of Connor's actions. So anyway. Okay, so another question that I see here is from Megan. What's your favorite supernatural power to write about? Oh, if you read much of my work, you will see that I love any kind of mental powers that, whether it be ability to read people's minds, or read people's intentions, or sense the presence or lack of presence of other beings. So a lot of my stories center around some type of mental power and the ability of one to use their mind to either control things or to control others. So that's probably my favorite thing to write. And if I've missed any questions that were before Carrie's or Megan's, feel free to repost them, because those are the first questions that I see. Cassie has asked, curious, where did the idea for this book series come from? And was there a specific point that this came to you? So yes. So in my house, if you can see behind me, there's a lot of what looks like clutter, but it's actually a lot of really organized stuff. My husband is a comic book collector, and one of his favorites is the X-Men and the X-Men series. I love them too. I love the whole idea of all this combination of different powers and the people's different abilities to do things. And so when I came up with this story idea, I was actually sitting one day and I was thinking about the X-Men, and the idea came to me to reverse that whole concept. So rather than having a world where, say, the mutation was now humans had powers, instead it was the opposite. Magic was normal and always a part of our civilization, but instead the mutation and the abnormality was the development of non-magical beings. And in the book I call them the common blood. And you have to read a little bit more to get that out of the book from what I read today. And so then throughout the story they're kind of manipulating with magical powers and trying to enhance them and doing a lot of experimentations and things like that to try to deal with the non-magical humans. And so it's kind of just reversing the whole concept of X-Men instead, and so the mutation is the opposite. And so that's where the whole idea came from is from the X-Men. Okay, let's see. See, I think if there are any other questions, that's the only ones that I see here so far. So I don't know if there's more, but that's all that's coming up scrolling here for me. So if there are any others, please feel free to post them. I also don't know if it's because of where the video is, even though I see that there are a lot more comments than what it's actually showing me here. Let's see. Let me see how some of the other questions that I got in advance. So a friend of mine asked me when I asked for some questions was one. And I didn't touch on this before when I was talking about me as an author. And I am an indie author, self-published author. So one of my friends asked me if I would ever try to traditionally publish a book. At this point, I will say. I'll never say never to anything, because the moment you say never to something is the moment that you're going to do it, right? So I don't have any plans to traditionally publish any of my books. My plan is to indie publish all the way. I'm a big supporter of indie authors and self-published authors, and I would even go as far as to say, like, right now 80% of the books that I read and buy are from indie authors. I really try to support indie writers. And I think there's a big misunderstanding that, if you're indie published, then it's not good. And that's, and I've read just as many bad traditionally published books as I have indie books. And so at this juncture in my career, I plan to indie publish all my work. But that's not to say that something won't change my mind down the road or trigger an opportunity. And, it's just like your, retirement, portfolio, right? You diversify. You never know what's going to happen. So it's always a possibility. Okay, let's see. Those were all the questions that I had, so I don't know if there are more questions yet. I still don't see anything popping up. So, if you have any more questions, please feel free to type away. Anyway, so yeah, so that is my book. So if you would like to read more, my books are available on Amazon. Really, I mean, whatever your reading preference is, they're available. Amazon, iBooks, Barnes & Noble, Kobo. I think those are the main ones. You can find my books on all of those. And they're available in paperback, hardcover, and ebooks. So really, whatever your reading preference is, they're there. I believe if you go to the into the event page, I posted some links where you could actually go and find them if you're interested in reading more of this book. Okay, let's see. Casey has another question. Is there a genre you haven't written in that you would love to write in? Yes. So I write science fiction and fantasy, but most of my work is more on the fantasy side. So I guess it's really getting more into the subgenre of fantasy. And I would really like to write, and I've got some ideas for a book that's actually more space opera-ish, so written in space and in a new galaxy, kind of more Star Warsy inspired kind of book. It is definitely different from what I've written, and so it's like when you think about science fiction and fantasy, it's a very broad genre, and there's a lot of subgenres within it. And so that's probably one day in the future, once I get done with some of these other mini projects that I have going on, I would like to dive more into that kind of science fiction writing. Let's see, there's another question from Megan. Which genre do you admire but don't feel equipped to write? Ugh. Historical. Anything like historical, like literature. Not from like a science fiction fantasy. Like I love, like there's I can't think of her name right now. She writes kind of like historical mysteries, and I love historical mysteries. I love any book that has a mystery element to it. I'm not a big fan of like modern day like cozy mystery, things like that. They're not my favorite. Occasionally I enjoy one, but I really love when people like dive into some kind of the history behind maybe some kind of family secret and trauma. So you really dive into the research and the things you have to dig into to write a good historical novel to me is like so super impressive. Even though I guess a lot of research goes into science fiction and fantasy, but to me that's different. I don't know why it's different, but it's different. I always think of like historical fiction as like, I don't want to write my dissertation again. And I feel like writing historical fiction would be like writing my dissertation again because of all the facts and all the information you have to gather and make sure you're right and you've got the time period correct and the things that would be there and things like, so I find it super impressive when people do such a great job at that and take on that task. But I don't think that I would ever take on a historical novel to that degree. I'm super, super impressed with those who do. Let's see. What is the biggest piece of advice you received that served you best as a writer? The biggest piece of advice. Oh, let's see. What would be the best? I've received from somebody else. That's a good question. You know, never think you've learned all you need to learn. You know, when it comes to writing, like you can sit down and write your first novel, and you can think you know what you've got it down, and that it's great, but until you write your next one, and then your next one, and your next one, and even though you get all that practice in, there's always more things to learn. And like, so I am one of those. I am a very studious person, and I spend a lot of time, in addition to reading novels and fiction work, I spend a lot of time reading craft development books as well. And you know, the more you study, the more you keep putting back into that craft, the better your writing will be. And I agree with that. I think that is everybody should practice that. Never assume that you know everything. Always accept that there is more to learn, and that there is somebody out there who can teach you something. And I think that's what I love so much about the writing community that Raquel has built through the Writers Atelier. Is it's such a helpful and supportive group, and I've learned so much from so many people within this group. And so it's really good to just constantly always keep your mind open to learning more, and accepting that you don't know everything, and that there's always something new you can learn that could improve your writing skills and abilities. Let's see. Okay. What else do you spend your time on when you're not writing, reading? Any other talents and hobbies, like, say, painting or making pottery? I know that's coming from Raquel. Yes. In addition to writing, I am an avid painter, and I make pottery, and I make homemade watercolor paints. So my passion outside of writing is watercolor painting and pottery. So I own my own pottery wheel and kiln, and I make all hand turn, mugs and bowls and plates and things like that, and I do sell them online. Same thing with handmade watercolor paints. I haven't actually started selling any of my artwork yet. Maybe one day I will, when I finally feel like, I don't paint because I want to sell it. I paint because it makes me happy. But maybe one day I'll decide to sell some artwork. I have no idea. But I do sell handmade watercolor paints, and I sell those through an art business that I call Anthesis Arts. And you can find more about Anthesis Arts on Instagram at Anthesis Arts, ANTHESISARTS, if you're interested. But yes, and I also have a website, anthesisarts.com. So, let's see. What are your best organization, productivity, habits, routines, secrets for this crazy time we're living in? Planning and scheduling. Because right now, with everything that's going on, like I said, I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they are at home. And thank the Lord, my kids' school is basically teaching my kids. They're doing everything through Zoom and online. So all I really have to do is facilitate and provide IT support. But it does require me to set aside about 3 or 4 hours of my morning to kind of work with them to make sure they have everything going. So I am a huge, I love journals. I have tons of journals. My planner's out in the living room, where I would pick it up and show you, here's my planner. But I literally plan out my entire day, my entire week on Sunday. I usually sit down on Sunday evening, and I decide exactly what I'm going to do every single day of this upcoming week. And I plan out my mornings, my afternoons, and my evenings, and exactly what I'm going to do. I'm not one of those people that, I don't watch a lot of TV. I just every now and then we'll watch a show, or we'll sit down and watch something or a movie. But I don't really watch a lot of TV. I put myself into my work and my hobbies and reading. So I really hardly ever take a day off from what most people would term as work. And while I'm working towards making this writing a full-time career, I don't think of writing as work. And so it is something that I commit to doing 7 days a week. Unless we're like vacationing or going somewhere, I pretty much always write during some portion of my day. But I am a huge planner, and I think planners are important for maximum productivity, especially if you have to multitask. I am a huge fan of lists. I have lots of lists. I have tons of little tabs like this, a little post-it tab that I'll create lists on all the time, and I keep a whole bunch of those around, and they fill up my planner sometimes. So yeah, planning. Okay, see, what's your favorite book about the craft of writing? Oh. Okay, so as a science fiction and fantasy fan, my favorite is, one second, The Fantasy Fiction Formula. I wanted to write a fantasy, so I actually got this book after I wrote Fortitude Rising. So I wrote this book based off of some other plotting and planning novels, and then I bought this craft book, and this is the book that made me believe I could actually write an epic fantasy. And so I still haven't written that epic fantasy because I'm still going through all of my, if you can see, all of my little post-it notes throughout the whole book, all the pages that are marked. But this is my favorite, The Fantasy Fiction Formula. It's just, and I don't think you have to write fantasy for it to have some really valuable tips and suggestions in here, but it definitely is geared towards fantasy writing. I also should say that I am a huge plotter. I don't know how you pantsers do it. You make me nervous. But I am a huge plotter, and so books like this are extremely valuable to me. So that is my all-time favorite. That is my all-time favorite. Alrighty, so we only have a couple minutes here. Oh, I see your comment there. Writer's Atelier, I would buy one of those paintings. One of these days I might sell some of my work. We'll see. But anyway, we are about done with our hour, so we have just a couple minutes left. So I guess there's some last minute housekeeping things before we hop off of here. So I do have some new releases coming out later this year. As I mentioned earlier, the third book in the Magical Bond series, In the Wake of Rebellion, releases on April 21st. So that's really, really close. The ebook is already up for pre-sales, and the paperback and the hardcover will be available later this month. I'm not sure that those will be available on exactly the 21st. I'm trying to get there. But like I said, I am an indie author. I publish all my own work, and I'm a little behind schedule with all the craziness that we've been in this world. Later this summer, my first short story that's part of the epic fantasy world that I created. Oh, and I meant to show you guys this earlier. I don't know if you can see it, but in addition to my artwork, I also love making maps. I hand drew this map probably about 5 years ago. So this is part of my world building for the Gods of Dragons epic fantasy that I've created. And I've started using that map to kind of help create some short stories that lead into that. And so the first short story for that new epic fantasy series that will come out one of these days will be coming out this summer, and then I'll hopefully shortly follow that up with a few more. I've written 4 short stories total that are part of that universe. One of them is ready, the other 2 are close to being ready, and so those will also come out later in 2020 as well. I'm hoping that The Whispering Hour will also come out in later 2021, so if you want to be able to know when that might come out, like I said, go to the post in the event page. I post a link to where you can sign up for my newsletter, and you'll be one of the first to know when those stories and books will be coming out. Let's see. Okay, I also posted in the event page where you can find me online, all my social media links. I'm on most of the social media platforms, but I'm the most active on Instagram. Instagram is my jam. I love Instagram. I love pretty pictures. I think that's the artist side of me that just really, I dig that platform more than any of the others. So that's where you'll see me most of the time. Although I do try to stay active as much as possible on my Facebook page. I have a Twitter page as well. I'm not as active there. I'm trying to improve on that, but pretty active on Goodreads. But anyways, all my links are there. If you're on any of those platforms and you want to follow me or just stay in touch with what I have going on, please feel free. It's the more followers we have, especially as indie authors, that really helps boost our platform and kind of helps us grow our online presence, which helps with growing an audience. But the best way to support indie authors are really to buy our books. So if you enjoyed any part of the reading, please, I would love it if you would give my full novel a chance and check it out. If you love it, if you love any indie book that you've read, please, leave a review. 4 or 5 stars goes a long way. Reviews are like solid gold for authors. So definitely review those books. It really helps us boost our credibility to new readers and drags them in. And we need all those that we can get to help support all the things that go into continuing to produce more work, like paying for editors and advertising and marketing and any other kind of promos and that we need to get done. So that's all that I have. And so it's 3:01. Yay, we're done, and I kept it into exactly an hour. Yay! So I just want to say thank you so much again for hopping on and listening to me today. I hope you enjoyed it, and continue to support all the authors within the Writers Atelier community. So I will let all of you get back to your Easter holiday. Enjoy, if you haven't had your dinner yet, enjoy your dinner with your family, and God bless. Have a great day.